Hey guys, welcome back. So with continuing our coverage of Venom War, we have now reached the long-awaited face-off between Doom and Kang, who have both been scheming against one another for quite some time. So let's get into it. But first, if you're enjoying these videos, do be sure to drop a like, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and don't forget to hit that bell up top to get all notifications. Alright, so for this one, we pick up from the events of Venom War Issue 3, where like we saw, Dr. Doom activated the Flexo symbiote to attack Eddie Brock, only to then have Kang send the Red Goblin after Flexo. Cause like we talked about before, Venom War has a number of different rivalries who are going head to head, which started with Eddie versus Dylan. But underneath the surface, the rivalry between Kang and Doom has just been waiting for this moment, with Doom controlling Flexo to seize the opportunity to go after Eddie Brock, and Kang using the Red Goblin to go after Flexo. And it's pretty crazy how all of this even came together, with Doom traveling back to 1942 to set up Flexo as a sleeper agent in Venom's hive as a counter move against Kang, who already had a plan in place when he built the Rascal symbiote derived from Bedlam and planted it in the 21st century so that Dylan would give it to Normie. And there's more factors that play into this that we've covered on the Venom playlist, linked down in the description, but all you really need to know for what's happening in the here and now is that Doom and Kang both had their own individual plans as far as how they wanted to handle Venom War and what they wanted out of it. So as expected, that just led to each of them believing that the other one was just in the way, so they each planned their contingencies to handle the other. And it's here where we see that play out, because just after Red Goblin snatched Dylan out of Flexo, he then pulled Flexo out of Grand Garden Arena to continue their fight outside. And mind you, this whole time with Normie inside of the Rascal symbiote as the Red Goblin, he has lost all control once his symbiote is activated by Kang. So to most people on the outside looking in, this would appear to only be a fight between two symbiotes, when the truth is, this is actually a chrono-manipulative chess match between Dr. Doom and Kang the Conqueror, where their preparations all come crashing into this moment. So to compete in this chrono-manipulative chess match, they both bring their A-game, and we take a look at how they do on both ends, starting with Doom, because the next thing we do is head over to Castle Doom, where we take a look at his 15th generation scheme bots, who are essentially cognitively elite Doom bots that have all been programmed with Doom's intellect to run a cybernetic emulation of multiple Dooms, brainstorming ideas and challenging one another. So it's practically Doom GPT, set to run day and night without end. But among this brainstorming, one of the scheme bots suggests that they use the neural swapping techniques that Doom had taken from the Ovoids, because Flexo's current hypnotic imprinting could be expanded, repurposed, and weaponized as a way to use the Ovoid's mental martial arts against that preening chrono dandy, who of course is referring to Kang. So over time, this idea is challenged by other scheme bots. It's ruthlessly critiqued, dissected, and refined to where once they come to a conclusion, they present it to Doom at the weekly pitch meeting. And when they do, they bring him the idea of weaponizing the Ovoids' art of cognitive commutation. And the Ovoids, they're a group of aliens from another galaxy, whose science and culture were a million years ahead of Earth's. And back in Fantastic Four issue 10, when Doom told the story of his return, he explained how when he was being carried into space on a speeding meteor, the Ovoids saved him. And though his initial reaction was to get the strap, they proved to Doom that they were harmless by lifting insanely heavy objects with their mind. So right away, you know Doom was like, I gotta steal these powers, learn their secrets. But what Doom found more impressive than their telekinetic ability had turned out to be their solution to mortality, because the Ovoids had figured out how to switch their minds into another body. And for them, it was a whole process where when one of them was dying, they would just take him to the extra body chamber and put that mind into a younger, new body, which was something Doom initially used to swap bodies with Reed Richards. So after suggesting to weaponize the cognitive commutation, the scheme bots also let Doom know that Flexo's crude intellect would require even more extensive magic-enhanced hypnosis, since Flexo's not the sharpest tool in the shed. So after hearing this, Doom agrees, to where from here, next we go over to Kang, who we find at the Chronopolis, and he goes on to explain here how periodically every Kang must pause his conquering for perhaps a second or two, and then weave himself into a repeating time loop within which he can spend subjective years, decades, or centuries, while crafting thousandfold, endlessly multifaceted hyperplans of mind-boggling complexity for his unlooped Kang self later use. And it's in this Chronopolis or time loop where Kang has dubbed himself He Who Schemes, And he goes on to say he often finds himself disappointed by the lackluster ham-fisted execution of his sophisticated chrono schemes, so for that reason he's kept the most treasured and sublime of his strategic masterworks entirely to himself, where among those masterworks he's developed weaponized time loops. So what Kang ends up doing next is using the Fantastic Four as chrono-looped weapons by way of soliciting their help as they traveled through time on what was just another one of their adventures, using Rosebud 2. And Kang just phrases it in a way where it's like he can't counter Doom's chrono scheme directly, and the Fantastic Four are the only ones who could stop him. So he ends up sending them to 1942, which is where Doom planted his mind control in Flexo. Though this time around we see Doom hypnotically encoding Flexo with the weaponized version of the Ovoid's mind-switching neuro-jujitsu techniques, only to suddenly be bombarded by the Fantastic Four. And this choice was deliberate from Kang, because he knows how much Doom hates Reed Richards. But no matter how many times Doom would try to escape and attempt the Ovoid lore imprinting on Flexo at a later date, he would constantly find himself, or in what in this case is actually a Doombot, intercepted by the Fantastic Four time and time again, which is mainly because of Reed's chrono tracking gear in the time sled, which would allow them to find this Doombot every time. And because this is a time loop, Kang could have this go on indefinitely, or for however long Doom could endure. So with this working in Kang's favor, he believes that he's secure the win, while in the case of Doom, neither him or his overclocked scheme bots can come up with a way to work around it. But the wild card that ends up changing everything, it happens towards the end of one of these loops, when Sue notices that something's wrong with Reed, and she asks him to tell her what it is. And as it turns out at this point, Reed has realized that Kang has had them stuck in a 5-minute time loop, and Reed suspects that he's the first one to figure this out among them, because he's experienced considerably more time travel than the others. And on top of that, he's also noticed this Kang that they're dealing with, he's too arrogant and undiscerning, which is why he hasn't realized that Reed is fully chrono aware. And when Sue asked Reed how many times has he told them this before, he's like roughly a few hundred, and it's just like, man, that's a lot of time loops. But from there he goes on to tell them that Kang's hurried explanation of the Flexo-related Doom scheme, it keeps changing slightly with repetition, which is possibly because Kang is trying to keep himself entertained after repeatedly manipulating them each time. So as a solution, Reed tells them during one of their next loops, they need to find out exactly what Doom is planning by using the time sled to get to the right source. So that's precisely what they do. But when they arrive at Castle Doom, the scheme bots are just going crazy at the sight of the Fantastic Four. So what Reed does next, it almost feels like he's bringing the Ovoid situation full circle. Because when they get there, Reed elastically manipulates his vocal cords to sound like Dr. Doom, and the scheme bots go for it, which to me just feels like a really fitting twist, since Dr. Doom is bringing back a method that he used to switch bodies and impersonate Reed. So what Reed ends up doing here while using the voice of Doom is tell the scheme bots to run the plan by him one more time. So they end up telling Reed all the details, so the next time they go into the loop, they'll have more information to move accordingly, and we're not left in suspense for too long before we find out what Reed has planned. But on the chrono chessboard, so to speak, as it stands right now, Normie is beating Flexo as a byproduct of Kang currently winning against Doom. But the next time we see Kang approach the Fantastic Four at the start of a time loop, when he shows up, they're booing him, and Reed's calling him a lesser Kang variant. Because within the last 100-odd time loops, Reed's managed to upgrade the time sled's chrono tracking gear to backtrace He Who Schemes to his home time loop in the Chronopolis. And as soon as they get there, Reed gives Ben and Johnny the signal to go after Kang, or He Who Schemes as he would call himself. But the first thing he does when Ben throws a punch is place Ben in the middle of multiple time loops, which has him just catching his own punch from every angle, which once again is just a byproduct of the whole weaponized time loop thing. But Kang doesn't just do this to Ben, he lets Johnny catch some of it too. But it isn't too long before he notices that this was all a distraction, because while Kang was fighting Johnny and Ben, they were just buying time so that Reed could crack the time loop control panel, while Sue covers him in her defensive force field. So Kang puts Sue's shields to the test by using Johnny's initial attack against her in the form of another weaponized time loop. And I'll tell you, man, that this guy ain't the king of spamming the same attack. I don't know who is. But Kang doesn't believe that Reed has any sort of chance at circumventing his control-ware security, but Reed ends up getting in by elastically reconfiguring his brain tissue in order to convincingly match a generic Kang neurosignature, which effectively turns he who schemes into he who can't believe this shit, cause he doesn't even know how Reed would have had the time to pull this off outside of his surveillance. So Reed tells him that he had enough time to visit Kang's home chrono loop on several thousand occasions to develop this brute force neurohack, and he was able to do this by just stealing seconds from the 5-minute chrono prison loop, since Kang was too arrogant to even notice when Reed became fully chrono aware. And it's funny how Reed even admits here that this was definitely more difficult than faking Doom's voice print. So following this, next, Reed sends Kang to the scheme bots, and he places them in a 5-second time loop so they can just confront each other over and over again. And much like Reed, eventually he who schemes will realize that he's in a loop and he will find a way out. But with him being preoccupied indefinitely, this leaves Doom free to interact with Flexo in 1942, with the addition of the Mind Lord, the Ovoids. So now, just as the scheme bots originally planned, Flexo will be able to use the Ovoids' repurposed mental martial arts to purge the Rascal symbiote of Kang's influence. And when we jump back to Normie, Rascal, and Flexo, we see that the Rascal symbiote is back to normal. He doesn't even know who Kang is, but in the case of Flexo, he does remember Metalface, aka Doom. But when Normie asks who Metalface is, Flexo just tells him it's a long story, which just has me thinking if Flexo will be using his new ability at some point in the future. And as far as the Fantastic Four, aside from Ben and Johnny being banged up, they end up just leaving Kang in this 5-second time loop because again, it's one of those things that he who schemes will eventually figure out. And after that, they just make their way back into the time stream, which puts them right back where they started, in a sense, as if this was just another one of the Fantastic Four's adventures. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here, who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.